I find it fascinating. Last night on MSNBC, Rachel Maddow just basically laid out the case for a war crimes trial against George W. Bush, Dick Cheney, Douglas Feith, and Donald Rumsfeld, and Paul Wolfowitz. I mean, just it was almost a prosecutor's brief, and of course it was based on the book by Michael Isikoff and David Korn called Hubris. And it's interesting to see on the various progressive message boards, and in fact on our own board over at thomhartmann.com, some folks, just lavishly praising Rachel for pointing that out, and others pointing out that MSNBC was running Phil Donahue in the run-up to the Iraq War. He was the #1 rated show on the network, and they fired him because he started criticizing the run-up to the war in Iraq. He was asking the inconvenient questions like, really? WMD? Seriously? What about those aluminum tubes? And what about that yellow cake and Joe Wilson? And I mean, there was a real debate. I was on the air during that time. There was not just I had these people on my program making their pitch, the neocons, the we've got to go into Iraqs, and literally saying things like, oh, this war will pay for itself, and it's only going to last a couple of weeks, and not to worry, and, quack, quack, quack. I mean, this went back to 98, to the Project for New American Century, and 99, when George Bush told Mickey Herskowitz that if he became president, he would and he had a chance to invade Iraq the way his daddy had done. He wouldn't make the mistake his daddy did and only have the war last a couple of days. He would get out, he would go all the way to Baghdad, and he would hold that political capital through the next election cycle and get done everything he wanted to get done. He'd have a successful presidency. He'd privatize Social Security with the political capital he'd get, and he tried to. It's the first thing on his agenda during his, when his second term started, when George W. Bush's second term started in 2004, or 2005, when he was, reinaugurated. But one of the, so anyhow, there's this kind of tit for tat. My personal take on it is, all the media were corrupt and are corrupt almost all the time. I still think that it was pretty impressive that Rachel did this last night, and that it's a conversation that we need to have. Jay Bybee has been put on the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. The guy should be in The Hague facing war crime trial. He and John Yoo, who's teaching at Berkeley, wrote the legal rationales for torture. Doug Feith and Paul Wolfowitz and Dick Cheney and Don Rumsfeld conspired to literally lie. Now, whether they lied to the president or not is something we don't really know. They certainly lied to Colin Powell. And he clearly knows that. In fact, his #2 guy, Larry Wilkerson, Colonel Wilkerson, is coming right out and saying it. And in fact, has on this program. Colonel Wilkerson has been a guest on this program many times back in the 2003, 2004 period. Actually, I think it was a little after that, after he left the administration. But in any case, he's been on a number of times. He's rather outspoken about this. I mean, I think that he and Powell feel very, very burned by this. Truth tellers sometimes have a difficult time. And as much as, for example, Chuck Hagel, as much as I have problems with Chuck Hagel's biography, here's a guy who started out as a right-wing talk show host and then became the CEO of a little voting machine company, which now runs the voting machines in most of our country, what became ES&S and then became other things, and was elected to the Senate in a landslide victory, where even in African-American neighborhoods, they voted for Republicans, something they'd never done before. I mean, I've written about Chuck Hagel. I have a lot of questions about him. On the other hand, Chuck Hagel, as a teenager, he and his brother fought in Vietnam. Now, I don't know if they volunteered or if they were drafted. Frankly, I'm not a Chuck Hagel expert in that part of his biography, or really, nor can I claim to be an expert in any part of his biography, but he knew damn well the horrors of Vietnam. He dragged his bleeding brother, and he himself was bleeding, out of a firefight and into a helicopter and got him out of there. And so, when you hear all this Sturm and Drang, this Republican filibuster that's going on right now of Hagel's nomination to be defense secretary, I want you to remember this clip. This is Chuck Hagel dressing down Condoleezza Rice. I encourage you to go back and watch the video of it. It's on YouTube. It's easy to find. And, in fact, the whole thing, runs a couple of minutes. In fact, 4 minutes. And Hagel basically takes Condoleezza Rice apart. And every now and then the camera shoots to her, and she has a look on her face of anger that very few times in my life have I ever seen anybody look so like, if they had a knife in their hand, it would be in his stomach kind of thing. Shooting daggers is a phrase that is an understatement. As Chuck Hagel, as a United States Senator from Nebraska, Republican, was saying this to the sitting Secretary of State about President George W. Bush, who was the sitting president, and his war in Iraq. Here he is.
Some of us remember 1970, Madam Secretary, and that was Cambodia. And when our government lied to the American people and said we didn't cross the border going into Cambodia. In fact, we did. I happen to know something about that, as do some on this committee. So, Madam Secretary, when you set in motion the kind of policy that the President is talking about here, is very, very dangerous. Matter of fact, I have to say, Madam Secretary, that I think this speech given last night by this President represents the most dangerous foreign policy blunder in this country since Vietnam.
Since Vietnam. Foreign policy blunder. And he's talking about, maintaining and escalating the war in Iraq. This is from 2007. George Bush was president. Condi Rice was Secretary of State. They had lied the country into a war, and they were expanding that war. And their friends were making a hell of a lot of money on it, and the Republicans were getting their political capital off of it, and a lot of people were very afraid to criticize them. I think one of the exceptions, obviously, was Progressive Talk Radio. I was on the air criticizing the Republicans about it. Keith Olbermann was beginning to really seriously criticize the Bush administration, or maybe he had been doing it for some time at that point. When you hear John McCain and Lindsey Graham whining about Chuck Hagel, that's what they're whining about. Is that as a Republican, he had the temerity to speak the truth about war. And I find it fascinating that in the Bush administration, the two guys, out of all these people who took us to war, the two guys who kept saying, no, we shouldn't do it. No, prove it to me one more time, please. And finally, they had to lie to them to convince them, were the two guys who had actually seen war, Larry Wilkerson, Colonel Wilkerson, and General Powell. I find it interesting that in the 1952 election for President of the United States, the guy who had led the U.S. forces, or world forces, the Supreme Allied Commander, certainly led American forces as well, in Europe against Hitler, Dwight Eisenhower, ran on a campaign slogan of vote for Eisenhower, vote for peace. We've got a clip of that someplace, Shane. I don't know if you can easily and quickly find it. But it's why is it that it's the military guys, by and large, who are saying, and the veterans, who are saying, hang on just a minute before you jump into this war. You got this? This is 1952. This is the Eisenhower campaign slogan. Listen to this.
He has met Europe's leaders, has got them working with us. Elect the number one man for the number one job of our time. November 4th, vote for peace. Vote for Eisenhower. A paid film.
It's a Republican. Vote for peace. Vote for Eisenhower. He was campaigning on ending the war in South Korea. Harry Truman's war. And he won. And I would submit to you that it's the people who have seen the horrors of war who are reluctant to make it happen. And I think it's so sad that Dick Five Deferments Cheney Or George W. went AWOL and got drunk for a year in Alabama with his good buddy Karl Rove. Bush, that the guys who never saw the violence of combat, who never saw the agony of war, Doug Feith, Paul Wolfowitz, Don Rumsfeld, that these guys, Condi Rice, John Yoo, Jay Bybee, they were so enthusiastic to send our soldiers, our young men and women, and, well, not some of them not so young, but send our soldiers into this and subject the people of Afghanistan and Iraq to, just open the gates of hell. 15 million displaced Iraqis, over 100,000 dead Iraqis, so that George W. Bush could, literally the only reason was so George W. Bush could get enough political capital to privatize Social Security? Really? It's time for a war crimes trial. It really is.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
There's a certain point where you say Jerry Ford was wrong when he pardoned Nixon for all those things, and Clinton was wrong when he decided to ignore Iran-Contra, and this is wrong.